Clowney that left him with a concussion and sidelined for the game until the 40-year-old vet Josh McCown took over. Dan Orlovsky's here.
Good morning.
Good to see
What's
you.
up, man?
Good to see you. Max, tell me this. What did Sunday prove about Carson?
What I've been saying all along. First, let me say this. The best ability is what? Availability. It's not that you blame a guy for being concussed on a shot to the back of the head. The fact of the matter is, though, from 3 separate injuries, he has not been available for you. Right? This was my argument about Nick Foles. You may want to have Nick Foles, a really, really good backup, on that roster.
Yeah.
In the event that something like that happened. Okay, but I'm going to move that out of the way because a guy gets a shot like that, you don't want to like...
And he didn't do anything with the Jags.
And I would also never question Wentz's toughness. I've seen moments from him where I say, that is a tough guy. I'm not questioning his toughness, just his durability. You've been on this show, Dan Orlovsky, and you have said things like, no one could have done what Wentz did. He had the second most impressive quarterback season. Hilariously, you said that, by the way.
I said it's quarterback performance.
Performance, yeah. You said that, he's carried the team on his back. This is interesting because rarely in the NFL can you control for, wholesale variables, right? And yet, this same team that just played with Josh McCown played with Carson Wentz.
Predictable.
Against the Seattle Seahawks, right? They played the same Seahawks this season, November 24th. Not even in like the first week of the season. The season was well underway. We're getting toward the stretch run. They played the Seattle Seahawks. So I guess Carson Wentz must have beaten them by 10 touchdowns. No, in fact, they had identical scores, those 2 games, with McCown on the Eagles, with Wentz on the Eagles. The scores were identical. Well, Max, Wentz was dealing with all these injuries. In fact, the same players were injured for McCown, only Brandon Brooks, who's been like the best guard in the NFL this year, was also hurt when McCown got the ball. Oh, and Zach Ertz, who had 12 catches against the Eagles, had a lacerated kidney and broken ribs in this game. But there were identical scores. But let me say something about those identical scores, okay? Carson Wentz threw a touchdown in garbage time, 20 seconds left to make it that score. McCown had him in a position twice in that game, 2 times to tie the game late. In fact, they did a little better this time when you consider all that. Let's go. Well, Miles Sanders emerged. Miles Sanders was the same guy with almost identical numbers in both games. I mean, it's unbelievable how you can compare this. Carson Wentz had 4 turnovers in that game, 2 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries. How about McCown? 0 turnovers. Carson Wentz had a 75-something quarterback rating. McCown almost a 95. If Carson Wentz, he can't outplay McCown against the same team, this is your savior. As I've told you, he got fat against the NFC East, maybe the worst division in the history of football. But here we see that the team performs, if anything, better with a 40-year-old backup quarterback. Go ahead, Dan. I'll be accepting my apology, I guess, at the end of the segment.
I'll let Dan go last. Your argument is a waste of my time in this regard. You see, what happens is that Max repeatedly tries to change narratives. Like, for example, you're basically saying now Carson Wentz is injury prone, which nobody can deny. And you point to a few other things. But what you forget to mention is how you highlighted on many occasions how he was coached differently than Nick Foles. We bring up the injury to Deshaun Jackson, to Nelson Aguilar, to Alshon Jeffrey, and ultimately to Zach Ertz in the Dallas Cowboy game. But you neglect to remind our audience how you once said players were dropping passes because they didn't have the same relationship with Carson Wentz than they did with Nick Foles. You forget to mention that, okay? So all I'm trying to say, that makes absolutely no sense to folks who watch football. Like suddenly you'll drop passes because this guy is hitting you in the hands, but that other guy was hitting in the hands. I'm going to make sure I catch it for him. That don't make sense to anybody. In the end, what it comes down to with Carson Wentz is I'm looking at a guy that threw 4,000 yards, only threw 7 interceptions on the entire season, played every game during the regular season, got to his first playoff game, and the kind of injury he suffered, anybody could. Jadeveon Clowney, again, I want to make sure if he's watching, I'm not calling him a dirty player, but that was a dirty play. You speared this man in the back of his head while he was near the turf and pushed his head into the turf, causing that concussion. That could happen to anybody. I read yesterday a source within the Philadelphia Eagles organization how Carson Wentz was swaying and he couldn't even remember what happened and all of this other stuff. That could happen. Jadeveon Clowney's what, 260, 270 pounds and coming down on the back of somebody's head.
By the way, he had that face mask against Nick Foles last year, too. Like, when everyone's quick to say, I'm not saying he's a dirty player. Maybe he is.
Well,
you know?
I'm just saying there's two plays, but I'm not going to say that. All I'm saying is that could have happened to anybody. So in the end, forget the play on Sunday. And again, we're not going to argue about the durability because the durability clearly is an issue with Carson Wentz. He's got to better protect himself. But in the end, look at what this man was working with.
Yeah.
All year long.
McCown worked with the same thing.
I want to add to
That's
one thing
one
to
game.
Stephen A's point. Stephen A said that Carson Wentz was the only player on Philly. He mentioned that he played all 16 games. He was the only skill position player to actually play all 16
by the
games
way,
on that team.
And Molly, can I
Wentz
ask
was the only one who made it
Let me
through
say
the
this to
season.
Max. Let me say this to Max before Dan.
Regular season.
Let me say this to Max before I give it to Dan. You know what? The Toronto Raptors are looking pretty damn good. You really, really think they're going to have the same results without Kawhi? Don't give me one game by common count.
But that was the highest in the highest leverage game.
It's a game. It's a game with nothing to lose because you're a 40-year-old that was pulled off. Was he coaching high school at the time or something?
He was working
here. You pulled off and working here.
If you guys won't accept this evidence against the same team under the same circumstances with the same result, only a better performance, then there's no evidence that will convince you.
Okay, first of all, for you to come on and say the best ability is availability, but then say, you know what, shot to the head, I'm not going to hold that against him, is weak because you're undercutting him initially off the bat going, he wasn't available, but I'm not going to hold it against him because
not durable.
It's weak.
No, it's not weak.
It's weak.
No, it's not weak.
Either say that you think the concussion is part of the lack of durability or whatnot, and it's a Carson Wentz thing, or don't mention it at all because you can't say his availability is an issue, but then say, you know what, it was a shot to the head.
Watch this. His availability is an issue.
So it's a weak move. Second of all,
no, it's an issue.
It's a weak move. Second of all, for you to go back to that initial Seahawks game, the reason that it's just because it's the box score, Max. You have to actually watch the football games because you can't just look at a box score and say it's the end result. That first Seattle game was the first game with all the young puppies around him. That's when they went through all those injuries. Actually made the tape that became big in Philadelphia with all the issues that those skill players were presenting off of that game. So you mentioned the turnovers. That's also the last game the kid turned the football over was that game. So just to look at the box score and go,
I'm sorry?
Carson Wentz, just to look at the box score and go, well, Josh McCown performed the same way. You mentioned that Josh McCown got this team into the red zone 3 times on Sunday, yet 3 field goals. So you're saying Carson Wentz and Josh McCown had the same impact on the football team. Is that what you're saying?
Clearly. The team
I'm so happy you said that.
The team performed identically with those 2 quarterbacks.
I'm so happy you said that, Max, because 3 trips to the red zone and 3 field goals. Do you know who's the number 2 red zone offense in the NFL this year? The Philadelphia Eagles. And do you know who's quarterbacked them? Your guy.
And?
Carson. So you don't think having Carson Wentz on the field for those 3 red zone?
They would have been in the red zone. He turned the ball over 4 times.
This is too good.
He turned the ball over since November.
Pay some bills. Let's get in a commercial
East.
break. We'll come back. Baylor head coach Matt Rule will take over the reins in Carolina. He was supposed to interview with the New York Giants today, reportedly, Max.
Yep.
We don't want him anyway. I want Josh McDaniels. He's the interview on Wednesday. But instead, he is now the new head coach of the Panthers. Stephen A., I will start with you. What does this mean for Cam?
I have no idea. And the reason I have no idea is because we don't really know much about Matt Rule other than the fact that he builds programs, and he's been successful doing that. Now, for those of you who don't know, I know that I'm synonymous with the NBA, but I covered Temple football for 3 years in my first 3 years with the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was without question one of the most awful programs in the history of college football. I mean, it was so bad. I was a proponent of them moving out of Division I just for mercy purposes. That's how bad it was. This man comes years later after I departed, of course, and he took over the program in 2013. He went 2-10 his first year, 6-6 his second year, 10-4, and then 10-3, both bowl